Out of consideration for Andrew, I'm going to keep this short this morning. I don't want him later saying, oh, the first time in that church, and that guy went on and on. But it's been a wonderful morning already. Thinking about the prelude, When I'm 64, I remember when I first heard that Paul McCartney song, and I thought, oh my God, I hope I never turn 64. And now from the perspective of Longboat Key, I'm sure there are some of you saying, oh, to be 64 again. Anybody here saying that? Wish you were 64 again? Oh, to be 64 again. Time does pass so quickly. In fact, did you know it's the 40th anniversary of the Woodstock Music Festival? Yeah, it's a big deal. I saw the movie last night, not recommending it. The Taking of Woodstock. A little Woodstock trivia, by the way. Russell will know this probably. The two groups that were conspicuous at Woodstock by their absence. Come on, Russell. No? The Rolling Stones wouldn't quite have fit, but the Beatles and Bob Dylan. Anyway, the movie was interesting, but you know, during the 60s there was this idealistic movement, and you know, everybody has their own commentary on the 60s, and I have my perspective, but there was this movement, this idealistic movement that love would somehow permeate the universe and everything would be changed. And in some ways it was, and in many ways it wasn't. But I think one of the most poignant moments in the movie for me came near the end. The young man who was kind of incidental in the Woodstock celebration, but really helped make it happen. This young man who invited the festival into this little town in upstate New York was living with his parents, an older Jewish couple that had moved to this little rural community from Brooklyn. And they had struggled in a marriage and running this resort for many, many years. They'd been married almost 50 years. And quite honestly, as it turns out, the wife was a very difficult woman to live with. And you know, for some reason, God seems to place difficult people in our lives. I think it has something to do with learning acceptance. But at any rate, near the end of the movie, the young man sits down for a heart-to-heart with his father. The young man is ready to leave home, and he struggled with accepting his own mother in light of some things that have happened. And so he asks his father, he says, before I go, Dad, I just want to know, how have you been able to stay with her all these years? And in a very kind of nonchalant way, he responds as he walks out the door, I love her. Now, to me, that's a radical illustration of love. You can talk about the 60s, or you can talk about the communitarian impulse, or you can talk about all the other things that people consider to be radical. But to me, that statement demonstrates a very deep and a very radical love. And I think at its best, a faith community demonstrates that kind of radical love, that commitment, that acceptance, that openness. I really want to talk about community this morning. And a couple of weeks ago, I talked about two very different little towns, both sitting at 8,000 feet. I visited both in Colorado. One was Bonanza, an old mining town from the 1880s, now a ghost town based on mining and materialism and hard living and self-indulgence. And the other, Crestone, Colorado, based on a vision of peacefully coexisting spiritual communities which might educate and inspire the larger world. And each had a very different ethos and a very different spirit. And I believe that every community has a spirit. Every community. Every congregation has a spirit. You know, I was here at the chapel for about 6 months or a year, and one of our former members, after the service, came to me and said, you know, after listening to your preaching, I think you've really captured the chapel spirit. And I kind of ruminated on that for a while, and I thought, well, that's a compliment. Because the chapel has a spirit, and if I've captured it, I've probably done my job. You see, we are a community here at the Longboat Island Chapel. A community in the deepest sense is not just a geographical area where people live, not just a neighborhood. A community is a group of people moving toward the same purpose and in the same direction. What really makes a community is intentionality, purpose, focus. Now, I mentioned the 60s and I mentioned Woodstock, and you know, during the 60s there were a number of communes that sprung up around the country. These were intentional communities, communities with a purpose. But did you know long before the communal movement of the 60s, there were intentional communities all throughout this country in the 18th and 19th centuries. And some were quite radical. There were the Shakers in Kentucky and Ohio and Indiana. If you know anything about the Shakers, you know they were quite a radical group in many ways. There were places like New Harmony, Indiana, and Amana, Iowa, and Oneida, New York. And some of these were religious. Some were based on a particular social or political vision, and some were quite radical. As I say, the community in Oneida, for instance, they believed in complex marriage, kind of open marriage. One of the Shakers went the other extreme. They didn't think much about sex. They tried to keep the sexes separated. But all of these communities sought to transform the world from the inside out. And they each had their own ethos, their own spirit. You see, a community is a current of life, a heart, a soul, a spirit. The prophet Ezekiel said to the community which was known as Israel, a faith community, I will give them one heart and put a new and right spirit within them, a heart of flesh instead of a heart of stone. I think as a faith community, this chapel has a spirit we're celebrating. As Dan said in his prayer, we share in our sorrows and we share in our joys. We are one. We celebrate that oneness, that one spirit. We celebrate the fact that we are an open-hearted, open-handed, open-minded fellowship. We celebrate the fact that we are a living experiment of faith. Now, we have a rich heritage. We have a rich history, but we don't live in the past. We are an experiment of faith, a living, breathing experiment of faith.